So, Jonathan, as we consider all this, let's talk about your latest piece for Politico titled Biden White House is discussing preemptive pardons for those in Trump's crosshairs. In it, you write this, quote, President Joe Biden's senior aides are conducting a vigorous internal debate over whether to issue preemptive pardons to a range of current and former public officials who could be targeted with President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House. It's according to senior Democrats familiar with the discussions. The deliberations touch on pardoning those currently in office, elected and appointed, as well as former officials who've angered Trump and his loyalists. Those who could face exposure include such members of Congress's January 6th committee as Senator-elect Adam Schiff and former GOP Representative Liz Cheney. Also mentioned by Biden's aides for a pardon, Anthony Fauci, former head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, who became a lightning rod for criticism from the right during the COVID-19 pandemic. The president himself, Jonathan, continues, who was intensely focused on his son's pardon, has not been brought into the broader pardon discussions yet, according to people familiar with deliberations. So, Jonathan, what does this look like? What are you pardoning Anthony Fauci for? What are you pardoning Liz Cheney for, who've not been charged or convicted of crimes?
That goes to the heart of this deliberation, Willie, and why this is so delicate, because the White House counsel and a handful of senior White House aides, including Jeff Zients, the chief of staff, are having this debate right now in the West Wing, which is, do we leave these folks out in the cold and potentially expose them to Kash Patel's FBI and Donald Trump's White House for any number of charges or some kind of show trial to get a measure of revenge and at the very least make them pay six figures in legal bills to avoid such a case? Or do we offer preemptively pardons to people who there's no proof they've done anything wrong whatsoever and really may not want a pardon in the first place? That's a real tough call, because if you don't do it and Patel and company come after some of these people and you had the chance to give them inoculation legally, that's a hell of a thing to regret. At the same time, do you want to pardon somebody like Liz Cheney or Anthony Fauci and suggest any kind of impropriety that could only add fuel to the Trump aggressors in the first place? It's a real tough nut.
So, J. Mart, you've been at this for a very long time, covering national politics for a very long time, and you've done it very well.
Thank you.
Did you ever think that we would be living through an era where we would be talking about pardons, preemptive pardons for people like Dr. Fauci or for people like Liz Cheney as part of the political process that we've been living under for the last 8 years? It's unimaginable.
It's completely shocking to even write this. The idea of offering people who have not been charged with any crime, there's no even hint of committing any crimes, pardons, because the nature of the incoming administration is such that they're pretty open about the idea of pursuing a kind of third world model of when we come in, we go after the old guys. Now, I can hear what the Trump folks are going to say immediately, which is he's only doing what they did to us. And I think, guys, that's what you'll hear next year if the Trump folks do pursue these revenge investigations or indictments of they started lawfare first. They indicted Trump left and right. We're only keeping the same thing going. And you can see it easily right now. And guys, that's why this debate is so serious in the White House and why they're taking this, I think, with some measure of sobriety, even though it is an extraordinary precedent to set.
Yeah, I mean, J. Mart's right. That's the argument that the Trump team will make, as bad faith as it may be. So, Rev, let's get to your take on this. We know that when Trump was leaving office, he considered blanket pardons for a lot of folks. He didn't follow through. But we certainly expect when he walks in the door, he will issue a bunch of pardons, particularly the January 6th convicts. He made that promise on the campaign trail. That was going to happen regardless. But what do you think the impact of this would be if President Biden and his team follows through with this and offers these blanket pardons? We saw what happened when he pardoned Hunter Biden. How do you think that impacts the national political conversation? How is that going to be perceived?
I think it will be perceived mixed at best, and probably would get a lot of people concerned about what precedent we're setting. But let's not forget, Donald Trump not only talked about pardoning the January 6th people that were doing the insurrection. He called them hostages,
yeah,
and had them singing as a choir at his rally. So in the background of that, I think that people will be kind of mixed in their reaction if Biden were to do this. From the civil rights community, we've been saying he ought to be pardoning people like Marilyn Mosby, who was the prosecutor in Baltimore, Jesse Jackson Jr., the congressman. Even I have a brother in Alabama who's doing civil work. Look at people, Reverend Kenny Glasgow. We're looking at people that need pardons, that have come out and done well, served the community. That ought to be the standard. And I think to forecast what people may face, I think is something that should be discussed. But I would hope he also looks at pardoning people that have maybe made a mistake, but turned around and done the right thing. That's what pardons are for. And I think we should not pervert that.
Well, you know, what's so interesting is you read these articles talking about it, and Jay Mart's article. I mean, there are people like Adam Schiff, for instance, who seems to be in the crosshairs, right?
Yes.
And
Nancy?
Liz Cheney, Nancy Pelosi. But there are going to be a lot of people like Adam Schiff who say, Jay Mart, I'll just let you say this. A lot of people like Adam Schiff who said, don't give me a pardon. I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
If he wants to come after me, come after me. Just knowing Liz Cheney, I'm sure Liz Cheney would be the same. Like, go ahead, make my day. Come after me for doing my job. Make me a political martyr. Make me the next president of the United States. Here I am. Don't give me a pardon for something I didn't do.
Yeah, and Joe, I think that you're going to see more of that in the coming days. People who say, don't preemptively give me a pardon because you're going to suggest I need a pardon for something and I don't want that. Please don't do that. Here's the sort of backstory, though, for people who are less high profile than Adam Schiff and Liz Cheney, is people who are serving in the administration in some kind of a point of capacity, the Jack Smith, but also the below Jack Smith level, who are looking at the prospect of a lot of money in legal fees, potentially, if there is any kind of prosecution next year. And I think that's a bit of a delicate situation. I talked to some Democrats yesterday, Joe, who said, you know, maybe the better idea is you create a legal defense fund, or you get a handful of Democratic donors to commit to paying the legal fees for everybody who would be targeted by the Trump administration next year for any kind of political indictment. And you take care of it that way. The courts will dismiss the charges, and you absolve innocent folks of paying astronomical legal fees by getting these donors from the party to do the right thing. So we'll see if that happens.
Well, Jonathan, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things we were going to talk about earlier when I was talking about fear is, you know, Democrats and others have to stop being fearful. And one of the ways that they could do that is you could get big Democratic donors. You could get law firms, powerful law firms.
Right.
They could come to an agreement. And we've talked about the politicians, but you talk about the people in the FBI that did their jobs. You talk about the people in the DOJ that did their jobs.
Right.
You talk about the people in the DOD that did their jobs. And those people are the ones that, like you said, Democratic donors, other billionaires who actually want to do something positive with their money. They team up with great law firms, strong, powerful law firms, and you actually take away the incentive to try to drain Jack Smith or try to drain some of these other people who thought they were doing their job and following the law.
Yeah, no, exactly. And look, there's any number of sort of Democratic leading law firms, big city law firms full of Democratic lawyers who you can see stepping up and sort of offering to do pro bono work, or at least offering to do work that could be paid for by, you know, the Katzenbergs of the world, along with sort of other prominent Democratic financiers to take care of this. But look, Barnacle is right. The fact that we're even having this conversation about how do you approach taking care of these people who are going to be prosecuted, whether it's a preemptive pardon or some kind of like a massive legal defense fund, does speak to the extraordinary nature of these times. And it's the age-old question, Joe, do you take Trump seriously or literally? Because if you take him literally, he said he wants to put Liz Cheney in prison. So, you know, how do you proceed? It's a sobering moment.
Well, for those of us who actually believe in the third branch, the judicial branch doing their job,
Right.
I think you're right. You know, if there are people that would back, like people like Liz Cheney and Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, other people financially, and then you have big law firms in Washington, D.C. that said, we're not going to let the rule of law be trampled on here. Right. Then obviously you have people that could fight those fights.
Right.
And then any of these cases would be thrown out. And they wouldn't be drained financially.
And at the same time, it is still a very sobering time. I mean, this is where we are.
Well, of course it is a
because Donald
sobering
Trump
time.
won the election.
And that's exactly why we need people to step up and do that.